How do you even begin to talk about the crucifixion story? I mean, this passage here and the other ones in the other Gospels are what our faith is built upon. When the Apostle Paul is summarizing his ministry, when he's summarizing the content of what he preaches to all the churches he planted, when he's summarizing the message of the letters he wrote for the New Testament, he summarizes it in 2 words. He says his message is the message of Christ crucified. And so as we look at this text, we are looking at the foundation of our faith. Jesus Christ has been condemned by the crowds. The Jews and the Gentiles have condemned him as guilty, even though he has done no wrong. He is scourged. He's whipped and beaten within an inch of his life so that he's like a living corpse. And then he's wrapped in a purple robe and a crown of thorns, and he's mockingly worshipped as if he was a king. And then he's brought to Golgotha, the place of the cross. He goes to the top of the hill. He's nailed to a plank of wood, and he's lifted up. The holiness is almost too hard for us to look upon. But perhaps the most painful words for us to read are in verse 34. He says, "And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, 'My God, why have you forsaken me?'" Now, these are some of the holiest words, perhaps, in the entire Bible. So we're looking at this interaction between Father and Son. And so they deserve our careful attention so that we really understand what it is that they are saying. Now, some read this and see that perhaps Jesus has finally reached a level of unbelief. Maybe the relationship between the eternal God, the Father, and God the Son has been broken. It's been irreparably damaged. And here Jesus is crying out, "Why have you forsaken me?" And the Trinity is never to be the same. But I think that is actually to get this horribly wrong. I believe that these words of what's called the cry of dereliction, are actually tremendous words of hope. Now, you may not realize it, but these words are actually a quote from a song. It's from Psalm 22, in fact. Why don't you turn over there with me if you have your Bible. The very first verse in Psalm 22 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning?" And Jesus is actually quoting this psalm that David wrote hundreds and hundreds of years before. But as we look at the psalm, we're actually seeing that it parallels Jesus' experiences exactly. Look at verse 6 through 8. It says, "I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him." Or maybe look down at verse 16. It says, "Dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing, they cast lots." Now, why does that matter for us? Why does it matter that Jesus is quoting this song of such pain on the cross? It's because of this. Jesus' cry of dereliction here is not a cry of unbelief. It's not a cry of hopelessness, but it's actually a cry of faith. So you see, Psalm 22 goes on to sing about God's deliverance. It's a declaration that the Lord is sure to hear the faithful one when he cries to him. And even through this king's suffering, even through his rejection by the peoples, somehow through that rejection, the Lord is going to bring about eternal praise. Look at verse 24. It says, "For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him." Through the king's suffering, through this cry, our salvation is won. It's through this death of Christ that we receive eternal joy. The cross is Jesus' ultimate humiliation and also his ultimate exaltation. He's lifted up as a spectacle to the world and at the same time lifted up as our means of salvation. It is through his death that we are given life. It's through his punishment that we receive peace, and it's by his wounds that we are healed. And in crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus is crying out the first line of a song of praise that will redound for eternity. As those whom he has ransomed and bought with his blood will join him in this great congregation that he is assembling together, praising the Lord in the new heavens and the new earth. And so as we look at Christ on this Good Friday, as we meditate upon his death, as we meditate upon this cry of despair, remember that the message of our gospel is this: Jesus Christ and him crucified. And in just a couple days, we will see that this crucified one is raised again.